The year is 1937. The world is watching. She is Amelia Earhart, the Queen of the Air, a name synonymous with courage, freedom, and the audacious belief that human will could conquer the impossible. She was attempting the impossible, a flight around the world, tracing the equator, nearly 30,000 miles of sheer, terrifying risk. But the most dangerous leg of that journey, the one that would swallow her legacy whole, was a vast, unforgiving stretch of the Central Pacific. This is the ultimate historical riddle, a mystery written across the face of a boundless ocean. For decades, the public imagination has been consumed by spectacular theories, spy missions, remote castaway islands, and imprisonment. But today, we dive into the most probable, and arguably, the most terrifying conclusion of all, the crash and sink theory. It is the official explanation, the theory rooted in physics and failed navigation. But when you examine the evidence, the cold, stark facts transform this probability into an apocalyptic, cinematic tragedy. This is the true horror of being lost not just at sea, but in the indifference of the deepest ocean. We begin in Lae, New Guinea, where the last successful radio transmission originated. The date is July 2nd, 1937. Amelia Earhart and her navigator, the highly experienced but notoriously volatile Fred Noonan, boarded their twin-engine Lockheed Electra 10E. Their destination, Howland Island. A tiny speck of sand, barely 2 miles long, situated in the middle of 250,000 square miles of ocean. Finding it was literally like hitting a golf ball into a deep swimming pool, blindfolded. The Electra was packed to the absolute limit. Fuel tanks strained with over 1,000 gallons, enough for roughly 20 to 21 hours of flight. They were racing the sun and racing their own fuel gauge. This was the point of no return written in the starkest terms imaginable. The plan was flawless. Noonan, a master of celestial navigation, would use the stars and his precise calculations to guide them to a position near Howland. Once close, they would rely on the sophisticated radio direction finding equipment, RDF, and the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed off Howland's coast, to guide them home. But the plan was built on fragile assumptions: clear skies for celestial fixes, functional radio equipment, and, most critically, perfect timing. The distance was approximately 2,556 miles. They were aiming for a pinprick of land that barely rose above the waves, with a flight time predicted to take nearly 18 hours. This was not a test of courage. It was a brutal test of mathematics, precision, and luck. And fate, as it often does in the great mysteries of history, had already stacked the deck against them. The journey began well, but problems soon mounted. Cloud cover was thicker than anticipated, frustrating Noonan's attempts to get clear celestial fixes. The horizon line vanished, making their primary navigational method unreliable. They were effectively flying blind, relying heavily on dead reckoning, estimating their position based only on speed, elapsed time, and compass headings. In the vast, shifting currents of the Pacific air, dead reckoning quickly becomes deadly guesswork. As the hours dragged on, the Electra consumed its precious fuel, each gallon pushing them deeper into the abyss, further from any chance of rescue, except for the tiny, critical target, Howland Island. The margin for error was shrinking to zero. They knew they were flying over the international dateline, a moment that always caused confusion, but Noonan was supposed to handle the calculation. Did fatigue, the intense pressure, or a simple miscalculation of 1 degree or 1 minute of arc throw them off course by just enough to miss their target? A single degree of error over 2,500 miles equals a miss of nearly 44 miles. In the Pacific, that is the difference between life and oblivion. The radio systems, their lifeline, proved to be their greatest curse. The Electra's antennas, designed to receive the homing signal from the Itasca, were notoriously weak. The Itasca's transmission equipment, while powerful, was operating on a frequency that the Electra could easily receive, but Earhart often struggled to transmit back clearly. This became the defining terror of their final hours. They could hear salvation, but they could not talk to it. They were close enough to touch, but separated by a wall of static and failed technology. The climax of this terrifying flight began just before dawn on July 3rd, 1937. The Itasca, desperately waiting, picked up faint, frantic signals from Earhart. Her voice, thin but recognizable, crackled over the airwaves, full of a growing, desperate urgency. "Cloudy and overcast. Have been circling," she reported. She was there. She was close. But where? The crew of the Itasca tried everything. They sent blasts of Morse code, hoping Earhart could use the noise to home in on their position. They burned smoke and oil to create a visible column. They even sent out their loudest, clearest signals on the 7.5 megacycle frequency. Earhart's last, most chilling transmissions painted a picture of absolute navigational breakdown. She reported flying along the line 157-337, the bearing that ran directly through Howland Island. This meant she knew the line she needed to be on, but she had no way of knowing where she was along that line. She could have been miles north, miles south, or directly overhead. Her calls were agonizingly specific, yet utterly vague. "We are running north and south," she said. This was the sound of a legend, a pioneer, desperately looking left and right for a speck of land that simply refused to appear. The Itasca tried to tell her to simply switch frequencies and transmit her position, but the Electra's radio seemed unable to reliably receive these crucial instructions. It was a cold conversation in the dark, one side screaming instructions, the other side only able to plead, their positions separated by a thin margin of static and doomed technological failure. As the estimated time of their fuel exhaustion approached, the desperation in Earhart's voice became palpable. Her final transmissions, received faintly around 8:43 a.m. local time, were the sounds of a dream collapsing. "We are on the line. We are running on north and south." Then, simply static. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and unending. This is the moment the crash and sink theory takes over. The theory posits that, having missed Howland Island and having flown beyond the point of no return, the Electra simply ran out of fuel. The flight was not ended by a dramatic explosion or a controlled landing on a beach. It was ended by the unforgiving law of physics: fuel exhaustion. Imagine the final minutes inside the cockpit. Fred Noonan, his face grim, checking the oil pressure, the fuel gauges reading 0. The realization that their precision, their courage, their decades of experience had all come down to this. The engines, the powerful, dependable Pratt and Whitney engines that had carried them halfway around the world, begin to sputter, then cough, then fall silent. The silence after the engine failure would have been the most terrifying sound in the world, broken only by the rush of the wind past the fuselage. The Electra, a beautiful, heavy machine, was suddenly transformed into a giant glider, descending rapidly towards the dark Pacific surface. Amelia, the pilot, would have had perhaps minutes to attempt a controlled water landing or ditching. Unlike a modern airliner, the Lockheed Electra was not designed to float for long. Her last horrifying task would have been to fight the controls, pulling the nose up, trying to level the wings, minimizing the speed, aiming for the smoothest patch of water possible in the rapidly dwindling light. The water landing itself is a moment of pure, raw terror. Hitting water at even minimal descent speed is like hitting concrete. The forces involved, the G-forces, the sudden deceleration, would have been catastrophic. The Electra, already weighted down by the remaining oil, luggage, and instrumentation, would have crumpled on impact. The thin aluminum skin would have been torn open by the pressure of the water. According to deep water physics, the plane would have been swallowed instantly. The Electra's tail section, its wings, and its heavy engines would have pulled the fuselage downwards into the crushing, eternal darkness. The Central Pacific in the vicinity of Howland Island plunges to depths of 16,000 to 20,000 feet. In these crushing depths, the pressure is immense, capable of destroying any light wreckage that might have temporarily floated. Any debris would be dragged down, scattering across the deep ocean floor, swallowed by the abyssal currents. The search launched by the US Navy and Coast Guard was monumental for its time, covering 250,000 square miles. They found nothing. No oil slick, no life raft, no recognizable piece of wreckage. And this lack of evidence, ironically, is the strongest argument for the crash and sink theory. The plane went down fast, intact enough to sink instantly, settling in the vast, inaccessible deep. The horror of the crash and sink theory is its simplicity and its finality. There are no Japanese spy prisons, no secluded palm trees, no cryptic messages. There is just an engineering failure, a navigational error, and the swift, silent, total victory of the ocean. They were there, they were found, and then, in the time it takes an engine to die, they were gone. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, simply closed over them, erasing their existence from the surface world and hiding their remnants in a watery abyss too deep for human reach. The search for the Electra continues to this day, with modern submersibles mapping the deep sea floor near the 157-337 line. But even if the wreckage is found, it will only confirm the terrifying journey we have just described. It will confirm the devastating consequences of being off by a single, critical minute of arc.die. The theories of abduction or survival on a remote island offer us romance, adventure, and the hope that the heroes live to see another day. But the crash and sink theory offers us the unvarnished truth of the age of aviation. Pioneering came with an absolute, uncompromising price. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were not defeated by a conspiracy. They were defeated by the sheer, terrifying scale of the planet they tried to conquer. They were swallowed by the largest, deepest, most indifferent element on Earth. Their legend lives precisely because their grave is so inaccessible. The vast dark silence of the Central Pacific is the final resting place of the Electra, a place of extreme pressure and eternal night. It is the perfect, profound, and terrifying end for a woman who challenged the limits of the sky, only to be reclaimed by the unimaginable depth of the sea. The final curtain fell not with a bang, but with the cold, crushing weight of 20,000 feet of water. And in that terrifying silence, the greatest mystery of aviation was born.